What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Sports Card Madness, the podcast that focuses on sports cards, collectibles, the hobby, and everything else in between. For today's episode, we sat down with Jim Doyle. He is a vintage card dealer, and we discussed the advantages, disadvantages, and prices of modern cards versus vintage cards. We got into what vintage cards actually are and what defines them. And we also talked about short-term, long-term, what's a better investment? What's our opinion? So we got into all that. LZ couldn't make this one, so I took over. I think you'll enjoy it. Let's dive in.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ lane.
Kick is on the way, and it is good! It's good!
5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes!
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Sports Card Madness, the podcast that focuses on sports cards, collectibles, the hobby, and everything else in between. Today, I have a special guest, Jim Doyle. I've known Jim a while on Instagram. I guess we're Instagram friends, but we're finally meeting for the first time in this pod, so it should be fun. And Jim is a vintage card dealer and has a lot of insight in that space. So I thought we'd have kind of a fun episode where we talk about what vintage cards are and how that relates to modern cards and what are the differences and that sort of thing. So, Jim, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. And looking forward to talking basketball cards and vintage cards in general. And looking forward to it. Should be fun.
Cool. I'm super excited. So, can you tell the audience, what you do in the card world? I think it'd be interesting to hear. And I kind of know what you do besides cards, but I think that'd be kind of fun to learn about.
Sure. So basically, it's kind of funny. So I started in the card industry, I guess you'd call it, many years ago. So my first job was actually sorting baseball cards at a store called Rotman Collectibles in Worcester. So if we have any long-term vintage collectors that listen to your podcast, I'm still in Massachusetts, and was 14 years old and was offered a job. I was down there buying a lot of cards, and to me it was perfect. I got to basically sort cards and rip wax and make sets, pull stars, and worked there for about 3 years. And I went to college and kind of got away from cards. I didn't think too much about it. Went and got a master's and ended up getting married, had a family, and didn't do much for cards for probably 25 years, 27 years. I'm sure many of the folks that got re-energized through COVID. So for me, it was my mom was moving into a condominium and she was cleaning out her house. So she told me I need to get all my cards out of her house. And so when I did that, I luckily had collected some cards that still had some value, and managed to sell a few of those. I had a Ryan rookie, a Gretzky rookie, and sold a few of those, and then but just kind of get re-energized at that point. And then that was probably 2.5 or maybe going on 3 years ago now that I started up again. And I just kind of really kind of dove back in, and certainly the internet and Facebook and Instagram helped fuel that. And so now I've been back doing it a little more seriously as a collector, and then started dealing a little bit in vintage cards, mainly to help support my ability to buy more cards, basically. So that's kind of an overview of how I how long I've been doing it, and where I'm at now. So
That's really cool. So, what was the most valuable card that you dug out? Was it the Gretzky rookie or?
no. So unfortunately, this funny story. The Gretzky was raw, and at the time I was still kind of learning my way. So I sold that on eBay raw, and then back before eBay changed their policy, I think it sold for like $900 because it was pretty clean looking. And 3 months after I sold it, I got an email or a message from the buyer that said he sent it to SGC and it got an authentic grade. So whoever I bought it from in the 80s either trimmed it or it was a factory min size, and he wanted his money back, and eBay just basically took the money out of my account. So it was kind of funny. Whoa. That I didn't realize that, I probably should have had it graded myself. But so that was kind of a learning experience. But the most valuable card I had was actually a raw Ryan rookie that was pretty clean. I sent it to PSA, got a 6, and I sold that through PWCC when they were still on eBay, and I think I got maybe a couple thousand for
Yeah,
it. So
not bad.
it was kind of neat because I think I paid $300 for the card. You know, it was a big card even back in the day, and so that helped me realize that wow, that was pretty cool. It's like found money for myself and fueled some of my early purchases when I got back into it.
Perfect. Yeah, just for the audience, what can happen sometimes when he says raw card, this is just a card that you pull out of a pack and nothing has happened to it. That's considered raw. And when you send a raw card in and it comes back authentic, it doesn't have a grade. There are several things that can happen to that card. One is they could dye the edges to make it look less beaten up. Another is they can trim it, so they get a nice little table. They get a little clipper or whatever it's called, and they can trim the card up. And what'll happen is this authenticator will measure the card and it doesn't meet the standard specs by a millimeter or 2 millimeters or something like that. They don't give you the grade. The card's real, but it's been altered, so they call it authentic. So this has happened to me a couple of times as well. I just thought it'd be useful for them to know what that means.
Yes, yeah. It was a good learning experience for me too, because and I trusted the guy that it was my card that bought, but and I just gave him his money back. And then I
Yeah.
think eBay has since changed the rules that you need to
Sure.
start returns quicker than that. But
Right. Yeah. They have a whole program now where if you sell a card over a certain dollar threshold, they send it off to an authenticator on your behalf. Takes an
yes,
extra
yeah,
couple weeks in most cases, and then
yes.
they'll send it back. So it's an interesting service. I'm not totally sold on yet, but I think it's good for the beginner.
Yeah,
they don't get
it's a
burned.
peace of mind too. Yes, yeah.
So, Jim, one of the big questions I have for you, you say you're a vintage dealer, right? What are vintage cards? And what is the date for you that you think
Yeah.
marks it as vintage? I know we're a little bit older than some people, but
Yes, yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's kind of funny. So I am kind of a part-time dealer, and it's funny you say that because I had set up at a card show, the Flippin' Card Show, of maybe a year or so ago, and I had primarily what I consider vintage cards, and I had this young person come up to me with 4 Ken Griffey Jr. 1989 Fleer rookie cards that were graded, PSA 9, I think they were, and I mean, to this 14-year-old kid, these these 1989 cards were certainly vintage, and were older than him and older than many of the younger kids in the room. And so I mean, I guess I define vintage as back like in the 80s or earlier. And part of that, I think, is my worldview of when I was first collecting cards back at Rotman's, and I was buying some older cards like the vintage then. So in the mid 80s or into the early 90s, vintage was probably like 60s and back at that time. So yeah, and I'm probably biased. So in my
sure.
mind, I'm thinking like 88 Fleer basketball, when the productions of the basketball side were smaller than obviously the junk wax era of the baseball. But I know that certainly, I mean, there's some people that disagree with me, when they talk about like mid 90s basketball and Kobe Bryant and rookies
Yep.
and such. So I think that's kind of part of I'm biased because of how, when I was working at the shop and buying stuff, it was, cards that were say 20 to 25 years old at that time, that was kind of considered vintage. And I think I probably err on the side of, older, but that's my definition, I guess.
I feel like we all have a different definition. It's almost personal, right? I'm 43. My view of vintage is different than somebody who's 73 or 13, right? And you have your own view because you were working on cards back in the day. For me, I'm starting to think, I could be wrong, but I guess technically vintage means a card that's not made anymore. Like I'm starting to think of things like, 2012 Prism basketball almost as vintage because it's over 10 years old. They don't make them. It was the first set for Panini, which is pretty iconic. But then I start thinking, well, you know what? It really starts in the 80s and like, 86 Fleer and going on back, 1969 tops and all that. So it's interesting. I feel like we all have a different cutoff year. Even PSA does. When you submit online, it's got like 1980 and older, 1981 and newer.
Yes,
So it's
that's
fascinating,
true. Yeah. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So when you are at these shows, like the local shows, like the flipping card show or the Shriners, which for the audience is probably our largest regional show. It's probably 200-300 tables. You've also been to the National. I know you went this year.
Yeah.
What are you like the only vintage guy like sitting there in a dusty corner, or do you have or do you see lots of shiny parallels, almost like fish bait hooks, around like, or what's that like at a show?
Oh, that's funny. And it's every show is different. So I've over the year, the last few years, I've come to realize that every show has a little bit of its niche, and there's different qualities about a show that attract certain collectors to it. And I think those few shows you've rattled off, there's a wide range of percentage of vintage versus modern. And like my first really big show I did was in April of this year, and I was able to get a table at the Altman show. I know Lucky's is taking it over, but it was like you said, a 300 table show. It's my first big foray into committing to 3 days sitting there and selling my cards. And at that show, it could have been as close as 50-50 in terms of vintage to modern, which is surprising. So most shows would be much heavily skewed towards the modern. Like when I did the few times I did the flipping card show, it was when I just kind of started getting back into cards, and I was probably one of 2 or 3 dealers out of 60, when I was first doing the flipping show. And I think they've shifted a little bit. The National, I feel like, was probably similar to maybe 50-50 or 60-40, maybe a little more of the modern. I think the vintage has gained like a foothold. So I know some local dealers that when I was getting back into it 2 years ago, even, were all modern. They pretty much were all new shiny, prism and inserts and autos and such. And now even a lot of those folks have at least some component of vintage in their cases. So I think they've realized that the vintage is kind of like the slow, steady, steady train that, is pretty reliable. You might not have big swings in the valuation, whereas the modern, there are chances to maybe potentially have a big hit, but you can also have some pretty substantial, potential losses. So I've decided over the last couple of years to stick with what I know. So I've only bought a few modern, or what I consider modern. So I bought a couple of PMGs from 2011, 2013 that there were, older players, but in this modern, this kind of limited edition insert type of thing. And I think I bought into the hype. I probably paid too much for them. And it was kind of a learning experience for me, because I was kind of listening to some other people and, maybe didn't do as much research as I should have. And I eventually moved on from them and traded them and sold them. And I kind of chalked it up as a learning experience. So it was, I don't know, it was interesting. So I think it depends on the show. And I've also realized that, I have to kind of pick my spots, right? So I was lucky enough this past month to get a table from a friend at Dedham, because Dedham has, the Cardboard Promotions show has a lot of longtime dealers that really go every month, and they're there. And that might be 70-30 or 60-40 vintage to modern. And it's if you're in like the early flipping shows for me were frustrating, because I'm one of, there's only a few people that are looking for this stuff. So it was good and bad. The 5 people at the time that were looking for vintage bought most of my stuff that I had. But then there was another show that I did. I sold one card for like $50. So it was kind of like, well, but it was a learning experience, right? So it's not, to me, it's not always about, what do they make at this show, or what, how successful was the show. Oftentimes, even that show, I was like giving out my business card and trying to meet people, and future, if you ever know anyone that comes across basketball, old cards, or you want to trade, or need someone that wants to sell. So so I've been lucky in that I've learned a lot about kind of learning about the industry from fellow collectors and some dealers I trust, and just trial and error, basically. So even when I took a loss on those PMGs, I just kind of thought, well, some people go to like a weekend retreat to learn about how business is done, or like how to buy and sell things. And I pretty much, probably spent too much on a 2011 Bill Russell PSA 10 PMG, but I thought, well, I eventually traded it for almost a whole set of 57 Topps basketball, and it was something that was more in my comfort zone, and it kind of taught me that I need to kind of stick with what I know and what I'm familiar with. Otherwise, you go out on a limb. I mean, I guess it could have been I could have maybe made a big hit on it, but it was also, it made me realize I have to pick my spot, so to speak.
Yeah, those are great lessons in there. Almost, sticking with what you know. For me personally, when I got back into the hobby, 2019, 2020, I was just ripping open boxes, trying to get, the 517th version of a parallel Zion or something like that. I think I think I had made it, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I think intuitively I kind of understood, like, okay, rare stuff does better. Are these shiny things really rare? Or like, is a one of one card really rare if there's 2,000 one of ones that year?
Yes.
It's pretty interesting. And so I just started to think, well, vintage cards, especially vintage cards that are signed, and then ones that are signed by players that aren't here anymore, that is rare stuff. And
Yes.
yeah, you may not be able to flip it for like 10x tomorrow in some crazy way, but over the long term, I think those things hold value. And I mean, as a dealer, you need to think about, you're almost like a local shop, right? Like, you got to have inventory for everybody that's at the show. But at the end of the day, you also are a collector and somewhat of an investor. So you have to decide, what do I want in my personal collection for 1 year, 10 years, 30 years? Those are all very different things, right?
Yes, yeah. And yes, that's a good point. And I'm always like struggling because I'm mainly a collector, so I'm always have this internal struggle about which cards to sell and which cards to keep. And it makes me think of this. So there's this one card that I ended up buying. It was a 1956 team issue Boston Celtics large format card of Bill Russell that I was offered in a private sale. A friend of mine offered to me, and at the time there was very little known about these cards. So they were cards that were razor thin, like 5x7 or 6x9 cards that were sold mainly at the Boston Garden, and they came in an envelope, and you would buy a team set probably for 50 cents or $1 or something. So I was offered this partial team set that had the Bill Russell and a Kuzi and some of the other players. And at the time I asked a few people that I trust, I said, this person wants like around $1,000 for it. I have an intuitive feel that that's a decent price. It's not a bargain, but I feel like I feel comfortable, right? So a lot of times I'll ask myself, all right, I'm going to outlay $1,000. I have 3 kids in a house to feed and a house to run. All right, where I got to pick my spot. So I asked 2 people I trust. They said, I think you're safe at 1,000. So, around $1,000 later, I get this card. And I know it's a good card, and I want to maybe keep it. I might want to flip it. So I send it to PSA, and now PSA has graded 756 team issue cards, the Kuzi, the Heinsohn, Frank, Rams. I forget the list, but send it to PSA last summer. They hold it for 2 months, researching the card. And then after 2 months, right, they tell me that they cannot confirm the fact that this is an original card, basically, that they're going to return it to me as no charge, no slab. So I was very frustrated because I had the original envelope it came in. I was willing to send the rest of the cards. I own the Kuzi, one of the 2 Kuzis, 56 team issue that have been graded, but it was also a learning experience. So I thought, a lesser person, I think, or a person that wasn't invested in it, might have said, okay, well, things happen. I just got to move on. Maybe I just tucked that away, but I knew it was from that year. So I just sent it to SGC, and SGC at the time had labeled those cards as like 1950s team issue cards. So they just give it a general, because at the time, there hadn't been many that were identified by year. Well, as luck would have it, they decided that was the 56, 57 team issue, Bill Russell. They sent it back to me in a nice slab, identified as his rookie season. and at SGC one, it had a little pinhole in it. And so this was obviously a win for me. I felt vindicated that it was an authentic card and such. And then, my wheels started spinning, and I kind of decided, all right, well, there are all these other great cards that I want to buy, and I'm a collector, and I'm a big Bob Cousy fan. I was working on his master set, the PSA master set register. I still needed some cards, and I ended up deciding to sell the card. So I decided to sell this card, the Bill Russell team issue, through Heritage Auction. So I researched it, talked to a lot of people. They said vintage basketball, Heritage is the way to go. So I deferred to the people I knew, and so last winter they ended up selling the card for me, and it did very well. But it was a struggle, because I even now I have sometimes I wish I still had that card, but also I wouldn't have had the funds to go then chase the Cousy cards that I was still had a little more personal connection to and desire to obtain. So, but it's it's a balance, and but it's fun. I mean, it's kind of like, some of it is just, now I think, oh, when can I find the next one like that?
There's a lot of lessons there, for the audience, especially the newbies in the audience. As collectors, if we're just going to collect something and sit on it, we're less dependent on the whims of grading companies, because we don't care, right? I mean, maybe you want it in a slab and it keeps it in a good condition, or that sort of thing. But if you're selling it at an auction like you did at Heritage, grading companies become very important. And the good news for the audience is that there are 3 or 4 choices. Obviously, you've got PSA kind of at the top. I can't tell you how many things, especially vintage autographs, that they've kicked or they've rejected. I can't even count. It's dozens. And so then you're like, okay, cool. I spent that money. It's gone. Then you submit to Beckett, and you hope they slab it, because ultimately you want it encased in plastic. And if they kick it, then you're left with a trickier choice. SGA, as you said, is great, but I don't think they do autographs anymore. And you have JSA, which will put a nice sticker on your card and give you a nice letter. So I've actually gone all the way down to JSA. I failed. And JSA has saved me on some really obscure, like older cards, like referees and stuff like that. And I got the sticker. And then the irony is, if you take that sticker and send it back to PSA, 99 times out of 100, they'll slab it.
Oh, I know. So, I know, it's crazy. It's we are a little bit at their mercy, and so SGC I think will do just company issued autographs. So if it comes out of a pack, pack certified autos, but no secondhand other autos. And and I think some of it, I do know, like PSA there, it's difficult, like when you mentioned the obscure autos, and there's probably not a lot of references, and I think, like anything, even with when PSA thought, oh, they said that my 56 Russell may have been reprinted in the 70s or something. So I think they're just erring on the side of caution, because they obviously don't want if I had a stockpile of them and then I sent in another one 2 months later, I was printing these Russells in my basement or something. I think that they have to err on the side of caution, but so it's interesting, but
so fun. Let's say, one of your kids got into collecting and said, Dad, I've got $1,000 to invest in cards. I obviously stocks and bonds and other things are important, but I want to take $1,000 and invest it in cards for the next, 20, 30 years. So you've got 2 choices, really, right? You've got your vintage stuff and you've got the newer stuff, whatever date you set. What would be your advice to them, in which direction to go, and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my son, I have a 15-year-old son. He's going to be 16 in a week or so, and he got into cards for a little bit. He still has some players that he collects, and it's a great question, because I think long term, I think I would probably go with the vintage, some classic cards, like either in baseball or basketball, like 61 Fleer basketball, or baseball side, maybe like 56 baseball cards. But I know, just for his own enjoyment, like he likes the Seahawks, and he's a big he was a big Russell Wilson fan until they traded him. So, and he likes watching the players. So he obviously, we rip boxes once in a while. And so I know he would want to also collect things that have a little bit more of a personal meaning to him. So, I mean, I think I'd probably hedge and maybe say, all right, why don't we take $500 and we'll buy like maybe one or two vintage cards, either baseball or basketball. And I think I would focus on, getting the best card in terms of card appeal and technical grade you could get for the money, but also get, maybe Hall of Famers in any sport. And then let's take the other 500 and pick maybe, 5 players that you really like to watch, maybe at football or basketball, and we'll kind of go there. One thing I've come to find out just for my own collectability, balancing money and card appeal, I feel like vintage cards in the 4 to 5 PSA range, they offer a great opportunity to get cards that have wonderful card appeal and look, well centered and, relatively good corners. They might be some kind of a technical deficiency where there's a print line or a little surface issue or something. But to me, I feel like in terms of the bang for your buck, you can really look at a card and say, wow, that's a really sharp 4, that's a really sharp 5. And I feel good about that. Whereas sometimes, like even on the 61 Fleer set, I was almost complete down to like a wilt, but I had cards from like 3 up to 8, 8.5. And I'm thinking like, I have to recenter here because I want to have a similar type card. So whereas, you get up into the PSA 7 or 8 range, you're pricing yourself out at
of course, especially with vintage. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that
answer.
because I bought I believe a Jerry West 61 off of you, which is his rookie card.
Yes.
And my initial thought was I didn't care too much about the grade because I was going to crack it open and have Jerry West sign it. And, for the audience, that is a way you can add tremendous value to a card very quickly. And when you resubmit it, like let's say I bought a 3 off of Jim, PSA 3, there's a chance. I mean, there's a chance both ways. It could go down to a 2, it could go up to a 4. But, if you get it autographed, you're probably safe either way. So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
So, yeah. That's true. I have a good story for that. So when I first got back into collecting, and I got that money from the sale of the Ryan rookie and the Gretzky, I resold it for $600, whatever. So I bought 2 Bob Cousy rookies, and I bought one from a local card shop in Oxford. DJ's a great guy, old school shop that survived the junk era and is still going strong. And it was a PSA 4, 1957 Topps Bob Cousy, but a heck of a 4. And I thought, wow, that's a nice 4. I'll pay whatever the going rate was for that card. And I ended up cracking it open and had a friend of a friend that was able to get Cousy's signature on the card. And then a couple months later, I it was a Framingham show, but I had met Ted Wu. He's a longtime dealer. He does the Wilmington show, and I bought a Burke Ross Bob Cousy rookie. Same thing, PSA 4, but damn, it was a nice 4, right? So I cracked both of those and talk to some people. It doesn't matter if it comes back a 3 or a 2, whatever, it gets damaged in transit. You have Cousy, and I'm a Holy Cross grad and a Cousy alum. We have a connection, Worcester guy. So I send it off to my friend. He gets it signed, comes back. I resubmit it to PSA. So they're both cracked as 4s. And they actually both came back as 5, PSA 5 with a 10 auto in both of them. So I was, thrilled, even though they were just going in the PC, that I ended up getting bumped up a grade. So, and I also felt like, well, I was right where I said that was a darn good 4. So I felt pretty good about
when
it.
When that happens, it feels like you just robbed the bank and got away with it.
Yes.
Oh,
awesome. No. I because I've been on the other end of it too, where you're like, you think, how was that only a 3 or something? So
yeah, Cousy's like one of the all-time best autographers. I mean, he for the audience, he doesn't do it anymore because he's 94 and he's kind of backing down. But he would always sign for a donation to Big Brother Big Sisters. It's been a cause of his for 70 years, something like that. Yeah. So he's just an absolutely amazing signer. He's done so much for charity and everything. So it's really cool.
Yes.
I've got a bunch of stuff signed by him.
Yes, yeah, he actually just turned 95 a few weeks ago, so it's pretty amazing that
Oh, right,
he's
95.
and he's yeah, he's yeah, and I actually did when I've eventually finished the master set, the PSA master set for Kuzi,
Cool.
and as I checked, I don't think anyone else has all 10, so I think I'm the only one in the registry with 10. But I with the donations, I think it was $150 a piece at the time. I think I donated pushing a couple thousand to Big
Yeah.
Brothers and Big Sisters. So
It's a good cause. It's a good cause. I
yeah,
think
no, it was great. I was thrilled. Yeah.
I'm missing his in action card from 1961 signed. I'll have to get that at some point.
Yeah. Well, actually, I do have one. If I have an extra, if you need it, at some point we can talk. So
Perfect. So
yeah.
I'm going to do like a little rapid fire thing here between the two of us. So when you think of like the most iconic vintage sets across, I would say baseball and basketball, we can just keep it to that. What
Sure.
ones come to mind for you? I'll let you rattle them off. We'll see if you miss any.
Okay, yes. So for basketball, there I would say the 61 is probably my all-time favorite. 61 Fleer, just the colors,
Yep.
the Hall of Famers, rookies. The baseball side, I really like the 56 for baseball, like because it's got the horizontal design, and you get so many Hall of Famers too. Um,
I love the
let's see.
52 for baseball. It just looks so cool. I mean, obviously the mantle is, so iconic, but
Yes, yeah,
really
yeah,
cool
yeah.
card.
But that's, I mean, you got Jackie in there too.
Of
The
course.
Maze. There's so many legends. I guess for other basketball, I think in terms of iconic, such I have to go with the '86 Fleer, just because the Jordan and all the other rookies, the Hall of Fame rookies, and
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I think,
and
yeah, don't forget 57. That's
57, yeah,
that's
that
pretty
would be
important.
the other one, yeah. And I actually, yeah, that's and I'm my thought is to try to reinvest in a nice Bill Russell rookie now. I've
Yeah.
had a couple over the years, but nothing that I've deemed worthy to keep yet. But
Yeah. So 1957 tops is Russell's rookie card, essentially. So it's a pretty massive card, especially if it's signed. 61 is great as well because it's just chock full of Hall of Famer rookies, Jerry West and Will Chamberlain, and just, I mean, I can name them for like an hour.
Oscar, yeah, so many.
And then, yeah, 86 is cool. That's like my generation. You have MJ, and you've got probably 20 Hall of Famers in there, from your Karl Malone to Isaiah Thomas. And I personally have the 1986 Fleer set autographed, which is super fun. And the other set I love for basketball is the 1969 Tall Boy set. So it's these kind of oversized, cards. They're white. And it's got these, cool pictures on them of the players. So they're hard to find in good condition because they got the crap beat out of them by kids in the 60s, and they did not
Yes.
make holders for tall boys back then. So they were in a lot of screw down cases, which hurts the card over time. And they were in, Tim Gallagher, legendary collector. All his 1969 signed stuff is trimmed by an inch because he's like, well, they didn't make anything that held him, and it annoyed me. So he cut like an inch off of every one of his like really valuable cards, and he just like he's got them in a regular holder. Now they've got sizes for everything.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so a couple more questions. So I think do you deal? I mean, you've mentioned baseball a couple other times. Do you mostly do hoops? Do you mostly do basketball, or do you do a little
I
baseball?
do. Yeah, so I do. So basically, when I was younger in high school and younger, I collected primarily baseball. And when I got back into it, I felt a little overwhelmed by the numbers of baseball sets and cards and things I would like to collect, that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to really get a number of things and be satisfied because of a lot of the prices of them and such. So in terms of what I have currently that I personally collect, in that I tend to like buy and trade with other collectors or set up at shows, is pretty much all basketball. I toy with the idea of branching back out into baseball. It seems like when I go to these, many of the shows, there's such a high demand for the baseball Hall of Famers, Jackie and Mantle and Williams and Mays and Aaron, that I kind of sometimes I wonder, am I like selling myself short, where I have I'm focused. So it's good, when I go to a show, I'm one of the few people that has a lot of high quality vintage basketball. But then at Dedham last time, there were quite a few people that were like, "Oh, geez, you don't have any baseball."
Interesting.
So I'm debating kind of branching out, and I kind of have to see. I felt like, again, sometimes if I go beyond just kind of the known names, that I'd be, spreading myself a little bit thin too. So whereas
Sure.
whereas the basketball thing as well, if I get I get hold these cards and I never sell them, I have no trouble, just tucking them away for another 20 years. So
Right, because you like
that's
them.
where I'm at now, but we'll see
Interesting.
what happens.
I have the same issue. I'm heavily weighted towards hoops, and I think it's important to diversify a little bit. So
Mhm.
I think one of my goals as a collector over the next year, I would say, is to get some blue chip baseball cards, like a
Mhm.
Jackie, like a Mantle, nothing crazy, um, autographed if possible, but that we'll see.
Mhm.
I just want to diversify a little, so it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh,
So, all right. So one final question. We ask every guest this question. If you could sit down and get a coffee with any sports figure that's ever lived, could be alive right now, who would it be and why?
I didn't hear the beginning part of that. Could you
Oh,
say that
sorry.
again?
If you could sit down and get coffee with any
Oh, get coffee.
sports
Okay,
figure, yep,
coffee.
you
Yeah,
can sit down
I
for an
thought you
hour
had
or
my
two, just
my
talk to him, have
internet.
coffee. Who would it be?
I think I would go with Bob Cousy, just because of the Holy Cross connection, and he kind of adopted Worcester as his second home. I grew up in the city of Worcester, and we share the same alma mater. We both went to Holy Cross, and I've been lucky enough to meet him a couple of times. He did a book signing at Holy Cross a couple of years ago for his book, The Last Pass, and saw him at one other event, and he just seems like a real genuine person. He kind of adopted Worcester as his second home, and he's still very humble after all these years. All his championships, and all his successes. He's still even I think even this year he went to the Woo Sox, or the AAA Red Sox, and like threw out the ceremonial first pitch. And so he's even at 94 years old at the time, he's still kind of connected to the community. And yeah, I've listened to some of his interviews and read a couple of his books, and so I think it would be fun to interview him and sit down with him and just kind of shoot the breeze, because it's yeah, I think that would be fun. So
Sure. Yeah,
that would be my choice, I guess. Yeah.
it's a pretty incredible era of basketball that he was a part of. So it'd be fun to hear about how the league changed, in the '60s and late '50s. Cool, awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Jim, this was great. Just for the people on audio, what's the best way for someone to reach out to you? Like maybe they want a vintage card or they want advice. Where can they find
Oh,
you?
sure. Yeah, that's great. So my handle here is Doyle11 cards on Instagram. And that's probably the easiest way to reach me in terms of like the general population.
Mhm.
If you want to just send me a private message there, and I can, you can see, if you get on Doyle11 card, you'll see the sorts of things I have. My, inventory is always changing, but if you have any need for vintage basketball, I often have those items in stock. And then I'm also, always trading and buying, and searching for the next obscure basketball card. So
Great.
it's probably the easiest way. And then
Perfect.
then I can give you my email and such through there, is
Yep.
probably the easiest way.
So it's Doyle_11_cards on
Correct.
Instagram.
That's it.
Perfect.
Correct. Yeah.
Great. Well,
Cool.
thank you, Jim, for your time. This has been awesome for the audience. Please subscribe if you like this episode. We're on Spotify, Apple, pretty much everywhere where you get your podcasts. So check it out. We'll keep pumping these out every Friday. Jim, it was awesome sitting down with you. I learned a ton. It was a good debate, modern
Yeah,
vintage.
no,
Thanks again.
it's yeah, thank you for having me. It's fun. It's yeah, it's been a lot of fun getting back into the cards again. And yeah, it's been certainly enjoyable, and great meeting people like yourself too. That's the other thing about going to the shows and such, meeting so many cool people and great collectors. It's better than just doing only deals online. So I enjoy these sorts of things. So thanks again. I appreciate you having me.
Great. Thanks, everyone. That's the pod.
Okay.